Welcome to the Night Tube. I'm Stephen Knight, and it's a great pleasure to be joined by Sall Grover. Sall, how are you doing?
I'm so good. How are you?
Great. I'm relieved that I managed to coordinate an interview with somebody in Australia because I have a appalling track record of working that time difference out. I think anything over 3 hours is a bit of a challenge for me. I don't know how you feel about it.
It's the worst time zone. It's
Yeah.
even at the moment, the Olympics are on. And so trying to watch the Olympics in Australia, it's a nightmare.
Oh, we'll get into the Olympics.
Yeah, yeah, totally. But I had to wake up the other morning at 4 a.m. to watch a group of men run for 9 seconds. So what am I doing?
Commitment, for sure. Yeah. What do things look like at 4 a.m.? Is there anything of note?
Oh, nothing. Not
Nothing.
worth your time, don't
Nothing.
worry.
Not worth it.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe it'd be a good start and way in, just to maybe tell people a little bit about who you are. I mean, how would you describe what keeps you busy? How would you describe your profession now?
God, you stumped me. I don't know. I'm a woman who spends her time telling people that men are not women, which is utterly bizarre. I mean, I got into this because basically I created an app, a social networking app exclusively for women. And we got the idea at the end of 2018, developed it and built it in 2019, and we're getting ready to launch it at the beginning of 2020. And then while we were still just in the beta testing phase, had an onslaught of trans rights activists just absolutely inundate us. I mean, we were cancelled right out of the gate. Every company, organization, media that we had liaised to work with to help with the launch just stopped calling and stopped responding to us because there'd been these accusations of transphobia. And it was terrifying. It was horrific. And I was just thrust into this world that apparently not only are men claiming to be women, but some people are believing them. And so here we are, basically. I mean, 4.5 years later, I'm still doing it. And obviously I was brought into it from, startup / like company business perspective. And I stand by that because I'm still going to do it. But also, like, I am a woman, I have a daughter. Like, this is a fight for our lives, in a sense, as far as I'm concerned. So it's only ever, I'm grateful that I found out that it was happening. But at the same time, I utterly resent that it is happening at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's funny in the way that a lot of people who get into trouble in this area are quite strident in their views, whereas at the beginning you were just sort of doing your own thing, and it kind of found you, this fight, rather than you finding it. Would that be fair to say?
Without a doubt. I literally had no idea that this was going on. I mean, I'd heard that, like, I didn't live under a rock. I'd heard that, like, it was like LGBT now. I didn't do any investigation of that. I was just like, I support the LGB. So if they say there's another letter, like, okay, cool. I had heard, and I'd met, like, when I lived in West Hollywood, when I lived in America in the early 2010s, and, like, I'd met guys who called themselves transsexuals, because the bar at the end of my street was a gay bar, and had this brilliant happy hour from 4 till 8, and so that was, like, my best friend's, my local bar that we'd get to at 3:59 and leave at 8:01. And like, so we would chat, and like we would, like, these guys, they were these like gay men with a great sense of humor, completely knew who they were. Like it was like a joke about, not that that was what the topic of conversation was actually, because I probably would have maybe asked more questions. It literally just was not an issue. It's just like a guy kind of like wearing some makeup and a dress or something. You're like, okay, whatever. I don't care. So I knew all of transsexuals. I didn't know what it meant, but I just knew that this was a thing. I was like, oh, okay, well, like, live and let live.
Yeah.
And then, when, like, I came under attack, and it happened quite publicly, and, it's that thing, no one has a perfect peaking story, so you come under attack, and you don't know what's happening, you don't know what anyone's talking about, because what's being said to you is so absurd. Like, you're being, like, hounded because you're not accepting men or women. It is a very, very disconcerting thing to experience. And I just decided to go and do some research into what they were saying. I mean, they did say, like, you need to educate yourself. And I was like, that's a fair comment. So I did. And it turns out, like, the turf's wide and I'm a massive turf. Like, I was like, what you guys are saying is absolute nonsense.
That backfired, didn't it?
So, like, let's push back against this. Like, yeah, I still like, I sometimes like, I will just like stop, like just like mid walk or mid thought or something and just be like, this is what's actually happening. They're saying men are women and they put it in law.
That phrase is interesting because obviously men aren't women, and some I'm not sure where along the line, but that's become the most controversial thing you can probably say now, societally, culturally, in polite conversation. And I just wanted to get your perspective because a lot of people have different views on this, because it seems to have, the shift in landscape seems to have happened so quickly. I mean, can you kind of pinpoint where this started to happen? I mean, how far back in time would you have to go for that statement to not raise an eyebrow at all, do you think?
Oh, in the mainstream, probably 2016, 17, 18, but it was happening a bit before that. But that's probably when in the mainstream there was a shift. Most of us weren't aware of it. I mean, because even if I think I was peaked in 2020, if I go 2020 to now, 2024, how much has changed and how many more people are aware of it. So you think to the women and some men who were aware of it even before then, who knew it was going on, how much the landscape has changed. But I think, yeah, I mean, it seems I've just had to sort of just read about the history of it. I mean, the work and the groundwork was put in for this for quite some time, like since the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, in Australia, for example, I did not know this, but in 2001, there was a court case. There were two women, one of them, and they were a lesbian couple, one of them claimed to be a man, and they wanted to get married. So this is, 15, 16 years before gay marriage was legal in Australia. And they went to the federal court to get married, and the federal court allowed it because basically they were like, oh, like for all intents and purposes, the two people in this relationship think that one's a man, so we'll allow it. And it's like, are you kidding me? Before, like, gay marriage wasn't allowed, but these people who were lying, they allowed this legal lie to happen before they allowed it for anyone else. Like, it absolutely blows my mind.
Well, you talk about being peaked there and peaking, and I know what that means, and I hear it a lot, in gender critical circles. What is it to be peaked? What does that mean?
Yeah, it means to become aware of what is actually going on. So in the context of gender ideology, it's when you realize that there is no such thing as trans. It doesn't exist. Like it exists as a concept, obviously, but it's not real. It's not something to be taken seriously. It is a completely fabricated concept. Like, to be properly peaked is to realize that every single aspect of this is absurd. Even, like, this might be the most controversial thing I could say, but even the concept of gender dysphoria. Like, obviously there are people who are experiencing mental distress, and these people deserve sympathy. I'm not saying they don't. But if you think of this really logically, gender dysphoria shouldn't be a thing. Because to think that you're in the wrong body is obviously incorrect, and you should be talked through that. If you're just experiencing that because, say, you're like a little boy or a young man who likes the stereotypically feminine things, or you're a girl or woman who likes typically masculine things, it shouldn't be an issue. It shouldn't be something that anyone is given any kind of distress over. Like, if we were actually going for a progressive society right now, it would be like, of course the boys can like dolls and princess dresses, and of course the girls can like trucks and whatever else it is. Like, they literally, this shouldn't even be a condition. So yeah. I think to be completely peaked is to realize that every single part of this is wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, like you say, nobody seems to doubt that there is such a thing as gender distress, and I think obviously sympathy, empathy is the right response
distress,
to that.
I would say distress.
Yeah, and I think where the debate is whether or not that feeling or that condition should be affirmed, and the person told that they are sort of trapped in the wrong body and then put on a path of medicalization and transition. You said something interesting there that a lot of people will probably pull the knives out for, and that's that you don't think trans is real. I just wanted to expand on that a little bit, because I think I know what you mean by that, but a lot of people will look at that and say, well, Sall just wants to erase our existence. You know, they'll lump it in the camp of like sort of like pro-genocide. There seems to be a lot of hyperbole in the sort of trans rights activist camps. Maybe you can just expand on that a little bit, because I suppose it would be possible to say you don't believe somebody can change sex, you don't believe men are women, but you understand and accept the existence of transgender people. Where's the difference there?
Well, I accept the existence of all human beings who are currently alive or who have previously existed. Yes. I think we all do. So, yeah. And I mean, anyone, don't get me wrong, anyone can think whatever they want about themselves, so long as it's not affecting anybody else. Like, so long as you're not legislating anyone else to believe your nonsense, like, have fun. Who cares? But in terms of any sort of biological or legal concept, there is no evidence that trans is a real thing. This does not mean that I want these people to be genocided. No. I actually want them to be so safe that they're not genociding themselves. Do you know one of the components of genocide is sterilization? Yeah, it is. Yeah. And so this is a community that is actually genociding themselves. This doesn't get spoken about enough. Yeah, I know that if you say trans doesn't exist, and they're like, yeah, this is the things that they would say is, you want to genocide us, or you want us all to be dead. No. It's your ideology is nonsense. What you're believing is not real. There's no, it's just not, when we say it doesn't exist, it's because we're just saying it's not real. It's an imagination. It's like a unicorn. Like in philosophy, that's one of the examples I always give, like a unicorn. Like we can imagine a unicorn, but it doesn't exist. It's the same thing.
Then, I mean, is it a cultural thing? Because I suppose then if you really, I mean, science carried out in a lab and medical conditions tested in the lab yield the same results no matter where you do it on the planet, I suppose. You have human beings, you have certain conditions, and they're replicable. Is trans a sort of cultural thing that only really exists in certain societies and culture, much the way that perhaps anorexia did at one point, I suppose?
100%. Like from what I've researched, and like people who are much more educated on that than I am, that I'm just sort of essentially reiterating what they say on it. 100%. I mean, there are so many different cultures that you can look to and see that they take sort of what they create as stereotypes are different. That's basically what it comes down to. So like if you what are they called? You know the island of people that live like just off the off India, that the north I'm going to Senegal or something like that. People, it's that community that they're untouchable. They live like they're still in the Bronze Age kind of thing. Like
okay.
They've never
like in the Amazon.
Yes, there's some tribes in the Amazon, but this is the one that's literally not had. Well, they've had in like sort of the late 1800s. There were some people that got there, but they killed them, and they kill anyone that comes near them. And India protects this group of people, right? And apparently, from what they can tell, there's only about 60 to 80 people in this community, but they've been on this island for like 10,000 years or something, like a really long time. Okay. Do we honestly think that gender identity exists naturally in that community? Now, I would assume homosexuality would. We've established homosexuality does exist in nature, in both animals and in humans. There's every chance that homosexuality exists in that group. You don't even have to study them at this point because we've studied all other communities and history of people. Do we think that gender identity exists in this hunter-gatherer community that still exists in 2024? No, of course not. It's totally, I mean, Helen Joyce says it best, it's a culture-bound syndrome. That's how it works. It's your interpretation of what's happening around you. Like, if no one was telling a little boy that it was wrong to like to wear dresses or makeup, he would not build up a callus to that. There'd be no response. You'd just be like, okay. Like how there's no, when you tell a girl that it's fine to, there's no response to that. Or if you tell a girl it's fine to wear, like, look, to wear, not wear dresses, or whatever it is, whatever the stereotype that you are going against, if they're just allowed to do it. So I always say, if we were in a movement right now to be allowed, for men to be allowed to be as feminine as they want, like stereotypically, all the stereotypes, just break the stereotypes, and women break the stereotypes, that's progress. How brilliant would that be? That's gender fluidity. But you don't have to change anything legally for that. Nothing. It's just society, like, just embracing new things. And in a way, we were doing it in the early 2000s. Like when, like David Beckham, it was like this metrosexual thing, and men were starting to get interested in like hair care and skincare and things like that. That was really interesting. That was actual progress of men being able to care about that sort of stuff, because some just did naturally, or like men wanting to like wear eyeliner or something. Who cares? Like, fine. But this is so regressive that if a guy even suggests that he wants to do something like that, it's like, oh, well, you're non-binary?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have a gender identity that's different from your biological sex? Do you need medication? This is nonsense.
That social contagion aspect is very, interesting, but it seems somewhat taboo to talk about. And I think, is it because the transgender movement or the trans right activists have somehow managed to attach themselves to the gay rights movement? You mentioned then about homosexuality being found in nature and as we would expect it to be. However, the transgender rights movement has done a very good job at attaching itself to that movement to plant this idea in the public consciousness that it's all one and the same thing.
Well, they wouldn't have been able to do it if they didn't. It's like just a parasite attaching itself to a host. Because gender identity is actually in complete opposition to sexual orientation, because it negates the sexual orientation. But this movement has taken the goodwill and the hard work, I should say, not goodwill, the hard work that the LGBT community did over decades, and did properly, and worked at it, and made people realize that this was just completely normal, and that everyone should, homosexual people should have the same rights as heterosexual people, because of course they should. And then they attach themselves to that, and you've got to keep in mind that most people who call themselves trans are heterosexual. There are, because there's so many different demographics in the T, because you've got young women/girls who are very different from like the elderly men. Like, these are not the same demographic of people by any stretch of the imagination, but you've got young girls, many of whom are lesbian, but some whom might be just heterosexual, yet maybe on the autistic spectrum or whatnot. And then you have heterosexual, middle-aged, older men, many of whom have gone down a pipeline of porn addiction. All this is researched. I mean, Genevieve Gluck, so many journalists, they've done the research. It's all there. The evidence is all there. Like, it's just, so long as people just pay attention to it, it's all there. And so I think that they knew what they were doing, that if they were like, okay, if we can just attach this to the LGB, that's how we'll get by. And it was a perfect storm. And that's why it exploded, because the moment that, like, gay marriage, which was sort of the pinnacle of gay rights, it was like sort of the last thing at that moment in time. Once that happened, then all the gay rights organizations needed the next thing. And so, in came gender identity ideology, and what an amazing savior for all of these organizations, because not a lot of money in gay marriage, maybe for florists, but not really for anyone else.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I know, no doubt you would have seen like a publication like Pink News in the UK, for instance, is almost exclusively focused on transgender issues now, because that's the only game in town for these people.
In Australia, I mean, our Stonewall, which flies very much under the radar, is called ACON, and it was the Australian Council for the AIDS Council of something. I'm going to get it. The national something, whatever it was, but it was an organization that started in the 90s for research and funding and help for men with AIDS. And
okay.
Now,
that's a shift.
That's our Stonewall. Yeah,
Well, just
huge.
keeping on the differences between Australia and maybe the UK and other places, then, because I suppose we've in the UK, I mean, it's been dubbed Turf Island. We have a significant pushback in this area. It appears to be growing, which is great. We've had two kind of high-profile legal cases: Alison Bailey and Maya Forstater, which I'm sure you're fully familiar with. And I find that even though they kind of won their cases, there wasn't a whole host of public support for them or any interest in what they were going through. And I'm just wondering, in terms of your legal case, how are you finding the perception from the general public in Australia?
Well, I think that the general public, and I mean, this would happen to us in many different contexts in legal cases that are happening that we're unaware of, and we just don't appreciate it until it happens. That you just simply can't until you're in a situation where you go, oh, thank God that legal precedent is there. Like, I wish someone had done this before I'd come along and I could go, oh, yay, there it is. And off I go on my merry way. But it just wasn't. So, I mean, what Maya Forstater especially, what she did was once so incredibly brave, because she could have gone, this is too hard. Because litigation is horrible. It's hell. I wouldn't wish this upon my worst enemy. It's so long and drawn out, and it's very frustrating because you're not dealing just with completely logical arguments, because you can sit there all the time going, well, of course we're right about this. You're dealing with the law and how it's interpreted, and then you've got to convince a judge, and it's not like a real life scenario, but then you go, but the law has to reflect real life. It's incredibly frustrating, and it goes on for years. I mean, Maya Forstater's case went on for four and a half years. I'm 2.5 years into mine. Alison's been a few years into hers. They take a really long time, but then they're there and it's established. And so you might not get the support while you're going through it, but you will eventually. Because, say, Maya Forstater's a perfect example, her case. How many people since Maya Forstater's case have been so grateful that their views, that men and women are categories that can't be changed, and that you can believe that biological sex is real. That's benefited a lot of people, and it's saved a lot of other people going to court. The same will happen with Tickle V Giggle when we win. Eternal optimist over here. Even if we were just to win in federal court, and so we set the precedent that female-only spaces could exist, and that biological sex still had weight in the Sex Discrimination Act, which is the crux of the case. It's legal sex versus biological sex. We're fighting for biological sex. The other side's saying that legal sex is what matters, which means you can just change your birth certificate and that's all that matters. That was obviously not the intention of the Sex Discrimination Act. It was biological sex. I mean, there's no other kind. That's just what it comes down to. There is just no other kind. It shouldn't even be called legal sex because it has absolutely no reference or framework that it coincides with the reality of sex at all. But eventually, when someone else wants to do something, whether it might even be something for men, like there was in Australia a male-only barbershop, and they wanted to just maintain their male-only status, and I'm not sure what's happened to it. They've sort of gone off the radar. But they would be able to cite Tickle V Giggle to be able to do that, of like, no, biological sex matters, and we have the provisions to do this. I think you need to. We live in a world now, we live in this colourful world where we all coexist together, and I just think sometimes you need refuges, and whether that's for whatever reason, like I just don't, so long as there's no discrimination against demographics of people just in the general world, we're fine, but you can all go to your little spaces for a refuge if you want. I don't think this should be that controversial.
Yeah, definitely. We'll definitely circle back around to single-sex spaces. The setting a precedent thing is massively important. I think with Maya Forstater, the whole judge ruling where he openly said that her views are, I think it was the phrase was worthy of respect in a democratic society or something like that.
No, he said they weren't worthy of respect in a society initially. So in the first ruling she had, so Maya Forstater lost her first round.
Yeah.
And that's because the judge in that one said that her views were not worthy of respect in a democratic society. Like, can you even fathom sitting there hearing that that verdict when you're going, I'm just saying men are not women and humans can't change sex. And so she appealed it, and the appeal was really important because winning the appeal is what set the precedent. in
Got
that
you.
particular, because she went from, I think it was an employment tribunal, then to the Court of Appeals, and so then you would, that in that case you'd be changing the law. For me, with Tickle V Giggle, I'm in federal court, which is essentially the highest court in Australia, but we also have a high court. But the high court's just a court of appeal. So when you're dealing with the high court, you're basically just dealing with the law at that point. Like there's an error in law. But you can set a precedent in the federal court here where that's just the precedent. There you go, you've set it. So you can have a win now. But say we don't have a win and then I have to appeal it and we go to the high court. That is where I will just be saying there's an error in the law that's happened and the law needs to be changed.
I mean, let's talk about Tickle V Giggle then, because I mean, I know this has been done to death, but it sounds like you're making this up. That sounds like a children's book, doesn't it? Tickle V Giggle.
It does. It's so stupid. And my last name is Grover. Like, how stupid can you get? Like, I mean, the last name's actually Muffin. Like, it's so stupid. But that's why, like, I will say this: when anyone goes after him for his last name of being Tickle, like, I mean, it is an amusing last name, but so is Grover. Like, I mean, some of us just have silly last names. So I'll defend him on that count. But yeah, Tickle V Giggle. I mean, you couldn't make this up. I was a screenwriter. That was my first career. And if I had been writing a screenplay about gender ideology and I made like a central court case in it, like the B plot of the story, and I said that the court case is Tickle V Giggle, the first script note I would have gotten was, no one will believe that.
Too on the nose. Too much.
Yeah, just stop. Yeah, we'll do it. Can we do a second pass at that one? It's the fact that it's actually your real life. Sometimes you just sit there going like, oh my God, how is this happening? But yeah, basically a man who claims to be a woman, initially filed an Australian Human Rights Commission complaint against me on the basis of gender identity discrimination because I effectively, like you just in hindsight, I refused access to him to the Women Only social networking app.
This is your app that you launched.
Yes, Giggle. Right. Giggle is the app that we came under attack for, blah, blah, blah. And I don't remember refusing him access. I don't remember him being there because, I mean, we had gatekeeping on the app. It was AI gatekeeping. You take a selfie to get on the app. And it would just say whether you're male or female. It worked to 94% accuracy. That's what we had it set to. Human eyes would be behind the screen most of the time. I mean, like 80% of the time it was me. Well, you just checked that it was all working fine. And most of the time it was. Sometimes a guy would get through, like 6% of the time, and you just pick him out. So many men that we just removed manually. It just was never... It wasn't an issue, so to speak. Like, it was just sort of like, it was just part of the day. It was just part of the job. But this particular guy decided to, file an Australian Human Rights Commission complaint against me. And to settle it in the AHRC, I basically just had to admit that I was completely wrong and apologize to him. I had to say sorry. I had to just let him on the app, let all men who claim to be women on the app, and go to sex and gender education and moderate the content so that men who claim to be women weren't offended by anything that the women were saying on there. And I was just like, absolutely no way, I'm not doing this. This is nonsense. And so I said no to settling it in the AHRC. And so he had the right to do. I mean, it's the process. He filed in federal court and gave us Tickle V Giggle, the landmark sex versus or gender identity versus sex case in the world.
Something really jumps out at me there in that story. I mean, there's loads to get into. I've got a million questions, but I suppose this idea of being sent to sex and gender education. I mean, this sounds a little bit Orwellian. I mean, I suppose the kind of analogous thing I can think of in British society is you have like a speed awareness course if you get caught speeding in your car, maybe. And this feels like being sent for correction. And obviously you said no to this, so I don't know if you've got any insight as to what sort of things are taught on this training, this re-education.
Yeah, actually, there's a part of me that regrets not going to that. But why I wouldn't agree to that at the time, just like out of curiosity, was because when I got the complaint, I was 15 weeks pregnant. By the time we were going through this stage, I think I was about 30 weeks. I was like, I was so stressed. I was like, I'm not going and sitting in all of this. I'm not going to agree to any of it. But in a way, I wish I did, so I could have just sat there and taken notes. Because in reality, I could teach a class in sex and gender. I mean, it would be lesson 1, gender is bullshit, but...
You would be a nightmare student for that class, wouldn't you?
I would. They would have... The irony is they probably would have kicked me out. Would have been like, oh, who's being exclusionary now? But yeah, I mean, I do wish I'd gone sort of in that context to sort of do that in a way, sort of a missed opportunity. But it was just the time. It wasn't the right time for me at all, and it was so sinister. Like, you have to go to sex and gender education. I mean, it can only be re-education because I'm educated on these issues. So it could only be, you have to come here to learn what we think and what we want you to think and adhere to it. And absolutely no way am I going to do that. But while I was so repulsed by that, that wasn't actually the part that made me, in what they were asking, what made me the most appalled. It was the part of moderate the content of the app, because here you create this online space for women to be able to talk freely. And talk freely was like our catchphrase, it was like a tagline. We wanted a place where women could talk freely away from men. I have no doubt that men talk freely and in a different way when women aren't around. It's the same thing. We talk about different things. To be perfectly honest, we don't talk about you guys that often. We talk about a lot of other things. And so the idea that it was, not only do you have to let this man on, and all these men who claim to be women on, but you have to moderate what women say to make sure that these men aren't bothered. And I'd shut the app down before I ever agreed to that. But I also, one of the parts of the court case was, the allegation against me was, I apparently, according to them, I treat trans women differently to cis women, quote unquote. And I was like, well, yes, but there's a really legitimate reason there. It's because they're males. So I'm just treating males different to females in a context where it's the biological sex that matters. But beyond that, I was like, you're wanting me to. Because no female had come along and said, can you please moderate not only can you please moderate the content so that I'm not offended, I demand that you moderate the content so that I'm not offended. So that it was, the different treatment was like from their side part of the solution. I was like, no, this doesn't make sense at all. This is wrong. And I'm going to stand my ground here. I know that I'm not wrong.
What's the big desperate need then for men who claim to be women to have access to these platforms? Because this isn't just somebody who's been turned away and felt bad about it. This is somebody who's launching legal action. They feel that strongly about it. Now, I mean, it's difficult to know because we're getting into mind reading territory here, but is it a case of a desperate need to be affirmed as a legitimate woman? Is it the fact that they can't bear the thought of women having fun and having their own spaces without them? I mean, what's your perception of the motivations here?
Yeah, so just to get away from the individual, because I don't know. But in general, what I can assume is that it's all just about validation. Because at the end of the day, there are right now, like 14 to 15 apps that are specifically for LGBTQI+, and also just the T on the App Store and Google Play. There are specific places for this demographic of people. Then you've got places like Her, the lesbian dating app, that is now just LGBTQI+. Like it welcomes them on. Then you've got all the mainstream things like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. These people are excluded from nowhere in just general society, nor should they be. No one should be. But in terms of the little places that we've carved out for different demographics, of course they should not be welcome in a place that's for females. Like, I can't go onto like Grindr, for example. Now I actually had this fight with one of the quote unquote journalists who works at Pink News. I can't remember the idiot's name. I can't remember. But anyway, he was saying to me, we were emailing back and forth because he'd done an interview with me and he'd written this article and he was like basically about how exclusionary and horrible Giggle was. But I was like, but why? I was like, because there's lots of different niche apps out there, like Grindr. While Grindr has now expanded, and it too is LGBTQI plus whatever, it did start strictly for gay men. And I think that gay men should come and create their own new app because this one's no longer fit for purpose. But even still in what it's expanded to, I'm not included in it. I'm a heterosexual woman. So I was trying to explain to him that even because he was like, Grindr is so inclusive now. I'm like, but not of me. And that's fine. It doesn't need to be, but it's not inclusive of me. That's my whole point, is that there's still, even if you are going to sit there and say it's so inclusive, it still isn't. There's no such thing as 100% inclusivity. You can't. Because if you're going to try and cater to a demographic, you have to exclude others. It's as simple as that. This was completely normal business like 10 years ago.
Talking about being inclusive, I mean, what's your perception of the modern feminist movement then? Because I suppose, you know, to me, just as kind of a surface understanding, it seems very intersectional now. It seems very trans inclusive, and it'd feel perhaps the mainstream feminist movement couldn't be relied on really to support you. Do you feel like maybe you've been abandoned by that movement, a movement that ostensibly should be about, you know, the rights and emancipation of women for women? Do you feel that mainstream feminism might have lost its way in this area?
Oh, it definitely has. I don't feel abandoned by it in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I don't know what could it have done for me. I don't really know. I mean, what is the movement? I mean, for the last like 10, 15 years, it's really just been about, I don't know, pop stars, like women pop stars calling themselves feminists while getting like essentially naked on stage and like gyrating in front of like fully clothed men. So I don't really know what it could have done for me. I think that the feminist movement of like a really rejuvenation of it, and a much needed rejuvenation of it, is happening right now. And the one that's going to emerge from all of this is TERF. It's going to be an era in and of itself, like suffragette was. Like it's going to be a new wave in and of itself. It will be the one, because it is the one that is actually about the reality and females and what we actually need in society and in law. So in terms of all of the ones that are like floating around, like, yeah, okay. Because there's a lot that I agree with say like radical feminism, but I wouldn't call myself a radical feminist. I've always called myself a feminist just in that I've never been like a wave feminist, but just in that, you know, obviously, you know, women are equal kind of thing. But I was never like a big, like, you know, student of history of it or anything. I have become one now because of this. And there's some things like women who are feminists, I can read their arguments and be like, oh, there's a sound argument, but I don't agree with some of the things that they say. But that's one of the interesting things about feminism, is that you can be criticized as a woman if you criticize any part of feminism, because you're like, you know, how dare you? But there's no other sort of demographic of people essentially that are expected to just all agree with each other like women are. Like, and if we don't agree with each other, then like, oh, the movement's dead. Like, no, of course all women disagree like any other group of people. Like, men aren't expected to agree with each other 100% of the time. But
No.
women kind of are. And if we don't all agree with each other, then it's like, well, no rights for you. And I think that that's really stupid. So if what can emerge from this nightmare era of misogyny right now is that women are actually just seen as, finally, as like an actual group of human beings and a class of people that are worthy of respect in law, then I suppose maybe it'll be worth it. We might be better off at the end of it than we were beforehand.
Yeah, it's a good answer. I mean, is it even possible to have anything that can meaningfully be described as women's rights without the right of a woman to say, that's a man, that is a man, no matter what he says? I mean, that it seems like the entire concept of women's rights falls apart if you can't point at somebody and say, that's a man.
I would say it's not just women's rights, it's everyone's. I think it is, I will say this, in terms of fighting back against gender ideology, it is very short-sighted to say it's just about women's rights. We are the canary in the coal mine, don't get me wrong. And everyone should have listened to the women who were speaking up a long time ago and joined the dots and gone, oh, hang on, yeah, this will happen to every single person. but it's like, oh, it's women's rights, LGBT rights, children's rights, everyone else's, in general. Even if you're a woman who doesn't care about women's rights, it's going to come for you eventually. Because what gender ideology attacks is our freedom of belief, freedom of speech, and freedom of association. And they're the bedrock of a secular, liberal, democratic society. We've always known, well, we've known for a while now that is what is most needed. And so if you can't say that a man is a man, not just women's rights that are destroyed, it's yours too.
No, that's a great answer. And that's really the angle that I kind of came into it from. This, I first noticed the collision with freedom of expression and a very church-like pushback to anybody who dissented, you know, a lot of heretics. I mean, just to latch onto something interesting you said there about joining the dots and heeding the warnings of people years ago. I suppose that kind of ties directly into a current event, which is the backdrop of this conversation. That's the Paris Olympics. Rather, we're having a gender row, which was entirely foreseeable for most of us. There have been some heavy scrutiny on two boxers that are competing in the women's category, one from Algeria, Imane Khelif, one from Taiwan, whose name just escapes me now. I've got it written down, Lin Yuting. And I'm just wanted to get your perception on it because it is a little bit complicated in the sense that these aren't people that are identifying as trans. These aren't trans-identified males. There's something different going on here. However, there are very good reasons to think that they are probably biologically male. What's your take on what's happening?
They're definitely biologically male. My take on it is that no, they're not trans. They're not claiming to be trans or have a gender identity. However, how it plays out in the law with, say, a person with DSDs is identical to trans. This is the issue. Because this is the concept of legal sex versus biological sex. It's all the same thing when it gets to that point.
Just pick up on what you mean about DSDs then, because there's a lot of misinformation there around intersex and difference in sex development.
Full disclosure, I talked to, from my show, I talked to Colin Wright today, so I actually have really fresh information because he explained it to me so well today.
Thanks, Colin. Colin's great, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he's awesome. So DSD is an intersex, and like they can be the same thing or they can be slightly different, but basically, okay, let's just say, for sake of argument, you could call these people DSD or intersex, difference of sexual development, or intersex, whichever it is. You're dealing with a chromosomal difference, or just maybe even just like when they were born, that a sex organ wasn't identifiable, like it is for most babies. But both of these people, and they definitely have this, unless there's been some crazy conspiracy that's happened of changing documents in countries where you can't freely change documents like you can in, say, like Australia at the moment, where you can just, like, for $126 in my state, you just go and change your birth certificate. But so they have a medical condition, so that's no fault of their own, and all sympathy for people who are experiencing anything that causes any sort of hardship. It's not what this conversation is about. The fact is that they would have known about this from adolescence, like from puberty times. So there's actually no reason why they should be in the female category anymore, unless there are people, and it might not be them, there are lots of people out there that would use something like that to their advantage and put a male who has female documentation into female sports to win. Simple as that. And so because of what has happened in law of basically saying that legal sex is something, that legal sex, that all that needs to be looked at is documents, that's the be all and end all, and you don't have to look at biological sex, so that biological sex is meaningless. That's what's gotten us here. Whereas in reality, how reality actually works, how we live our lives is based on biological sex in pretty much every day. I mean, it's how we choose, it's how we make the biggest decision of our lives, which is who we're going to spend our life with. It's based on biological sex. It's not like we walk into a bar and see someone across from it in like the light, and we just go, oh my God, that person's so hot, I wonder what their legal sex is. No, like sexual orientation is based on biological sex, and we make decisions based on this. The law has to reflect reality. And then, so again, in sport, it has to reflect reality. And women's sport literally exists because women can't compete with men, whether it's just we're not as fast, we're not as strong. You get to boxing, it's like crazy dangerous. Like men can box better than women. If they couldn't, yeah, domestic violence numbers would be down. Like, it's not like women could fight back, but we just choose not to. Like, this is really established stuff here that we know. Like, we know all of this information, but because gender ideology has come in and has said that men can claim to be women and women can claim to be men, and what you were assigned at birth doesn't matter. Suddenly we're just in this absolute chaos, and it has sort of just culminated this week at the Olympics with men punching women in the face on live television. It's been horrific to watch. I've only watched one of the matches. I watched one, I couldn't watch another.
We seem to have a situation, it seems certain that we've got two male fighters fighting in the female category, and they're guaranteed medals at this point. Seems like they've got a very good chance of winning the big prize. And we know the regulatory body overseeing this was made aware of this before the start of the competition. They're certainly aware of it now. This to me is a massive scandal. And I keep thinking I must be incredibly naive, because it seems to be scandal after scandal in this area. And I keep thinking, well, this is the tipping point. This is the watershed moment. And it never seems to come. And I'm just wondering, what's your perception on whether or not the correct accounting will be done in regards to the Olympics? Will people be penalised for the decisions they've made here?
So what I think is there's not going to be one watershed moment in a sense. I may backtrack on that in a second, but overall I'll stand by it. There isn't, because what happens, because the news cycle, there's so much news and information out there right now, we only have a capacity for so long, the news cycle changes. So this news cycle will change in about a week, right? But the amount of people that have been peaked in this week will be then aware of the next news cycle on this issue that happens, and there was more, and then there'll be more, and it's just growing that way. That being said, I do think there will be, I think the big watershed moment will happen. I think it will come from America, and I think that it will happen from a detransitioner court case, and I think that they will be awarded a lot of money, and then it will be shut down.
That's interesting. I saw a tweet, somebody had replied to something I'd said the other day, and they suggested a turning point maybe when a big Hollywood celebrity's detransitioned child takes them to court. So you've got this huge meeting of Hollywood celebrity versus the issues playing out in the public eye.
I can think of the exact one it should be. Yeah, I'm not going to say it, but I can literally think of who it should be, because there's some child abuse happening right before our eyes. It's just astounding. Yeah, but it will be. I think that's how it will happen. I think because at the end of the day, money is what talks, and we are transition. You become a medical patient for life. This is pharmaceuticals, and so the thing that will stop it in an institutional level, and that will make governments and media and all these other places just go, oh, well, that never happened, is a huge big court case and payout. And the country that has massive payouts is America. So that's where a detransitioner can get like $500 million.
It feels like a lot of things are in the post in regards to this and detransition. So people who've been, inexcusably marginalised in this conversation, I feel. I mean, how can people help your case? I'm assuming it's almost exclusively crowdfunding in terms of your legal fees, and this is a very costly, long, drawn-out process. How can people help your case?
So at the moment, for federal court, it was $500,000, and we raised that. And so, through the generosity of people from all around the world, donated at gigglecrowdfund.com, and we raised the money. It's been paid. And now I'm waiting to find out what the next step is. So I'm not like actively crowdfunding, although the crowdfund still exists, because we definitely anticipate that it's going to go further. Because say if we lose in federal court, we will appeal. If the other side loses, we're pretty sure that they would as well. So I'm going to have to fight either way. Like, this might just be a little bit of a stepping stone part of the process that we just keep going. And to go to the High Court, we're going to have to rate so the first one was 500,000. The next one will be between $500,000 and $750,000. And I don't know if you've ever dealt with lawyers before, but they actually do charge every cent of their quote. Like, it's not like they go, oh, we quoted you this, but here's a discount. No, that doesn't happen. It's just terrifying.
I'm in the wrong profession, I think.
I got into the wrong field. It's just, yeah, it's crazy. So, I mean, definitely, for me, how anyone can help me is just sort of support the fight, whether it's, if you can't support it financially, just sort of amplifying it and making sure people are aware of it, or if you can, like, literally every cent counts. And, you know, all I can say is the only way I can repay everyone is that I'm not going to stop fighting for, like, in this fight. I'm going to go to the High Court. And this particular case, the Tickle V Giggle case, matters not just in Australia but worldwide, because part of our defence in it is a constitutional challenge. And we're saying that that gender identity, even being in our Sex Discrimination Act, is unconstitutional, which it is, because our Sex Discrimination Act is based on CEDAW, which is the UN International Bill of Rights for Women that was written in 1979. It's all about, it's a biological document. Like, they know exactly what a woman, female is. There's no mention of gender identity in there, or men being able to be women. And so the law our Sex Discrimination Act is supposed to be in line with that. They arguably are in breach of it right now. And 189 countries are signatories of CEDAW. So when we've defended CEDAW as being for women, and therefore our Sex Discrimination Act has to uphold it, for females, sorry, so for women and girls, and our Sex Discrimination Act has to uphold it, every other country that is a signatory of CEDAW can use that as a precedent if they are experiencing gender ideology taking away women's rights in their country, in a nutshell.
Honestly, I am impressed by how much of the legal aids you've absorbed over the years.
It's all I do. It's all I think about, Stephen.
It happens in your sleep now, I imagine.
Yeah.
The numbers that you mentioned there in terms of court costs are like eye-watering, and you're crowdfunding this and relying on the the good nature of people to support you. In regards to Mr. Tickle, have you got any kind of idea or perception as to what they do for a living and how they're able to pay similar court costs without seemingly crowdfunding for them, or are they crowdfunding as well?
So I don't know anything about his life. I don't know what he does. I don't know anything about him. But what I do know is that, just in terms of the legal aspect of it, he got a pro bono law firm to do it, and then the bulk of their argument came from the AHRC, the Australian Human Rights Commission, who intervened. And that's neither side of us have to pay for them, but they intervene, and they're government funded. But, for me, being able to go to a pro bono law firm, in terms of a big, he's gone to like one of the big, national law firms. I mean, can I say that from what I've observed, these pro bono departments have been quite captured. I don't think there would have been a place that would have helped me in any way or been worth it, that would have taken me on. I had to go and find people who, I had to find good legal representation, and that comes with a price. And then beyond that, while it's been hard to raise the money, to raise $500,000 in a year is a full-time job, and I don't get paid for it. So there were times last year where I was just having quite the nervous breakdown about it, because it's a lot. But we did it, so I feel really good about it now. But I don't get paid for that. But at the same time, the women who are doing this fight for me, my barrister's a woman, my solicitor's a woman, there's a junior barrister also it's a woman. There's three women essentially who are doing the fight for me. I mean, this is their job, this is their profession, this is their expertise. They've studied for this. They're brilliant. They work to see how hard they were working. Like, they were doing at one point there was about 10 days there. It was 18, 19-hour days. They were exhausted. And the mental power and just having to look at all different things. And between us, between the three of us women, I think we've counted, there's something like 14 children that we have, and I think they're all girls. We all have daughters. It's definitely three of us, we all have daughters. I'm not sure if one of them might have a son. But it's a weird case in that respect, because we're all here. Obviously, we want to win in terms of the law and for the case, and then for me, for professionally and personally. But we all have these daughters, and it's our lives as well. It's a really unique thing that doesn't usually happen. Usually, you've got lawyers that are just arguing a case, and it's like, oh, well, win or lose, like whatever, they get paid. But this matters in our life.
Yeah.
So, like, what happens actually will affect what decisions we make in our life, what we do. So yeah, the most ridiculously named court case of all time, actually is so serious and impacts so many people. It is what it is.
Yeah, and I wish you all the best with it. I mean, this hour's flown by. I feel like I could spend another 5 hours talking about it. So I'd love to have you back on at some point when there is some more to talk about in the case for sure. But thanks, Sal. I've really enjoyed this, and like I said, it's flown by.
Thank you so much. Honestly, I love your tweets, because you do tweets where you do sort of talk about like the religious aspect of this, and maybe next time we chat we can get into that, because just to sort of end it, I will say that I came of age like in my early 20s, and I was studying philosophy at uni. I just happened to have come of age then in the new atheism era, and I never got really strictly like involved in it how some people did. But I read the books and I was like, well, this completely makes sense. And I would watch the debates, and, I still do, because I just watch things Christopher Hitchens said, and I just replace what he's saying with religion, with gender ideology, and the whole argument works.
It fits like a jigsaw, doesn't it? Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect analogy.
It's like a glove. It's amazing. Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy to watch, because it's where you see that just all ideologies can actually be destroyed by the same argument.
Agreed. It's always a great point to end on, the late great Christopher Hitchens, I think. So thanks for that, Sal. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.